My name is Matt Lees, and this is a slightly more lo-fi video than usual because I just had a quick, simple point that I wanted to make, and that point is answering a question that I'll come to in just a minute. But first of all, there's been an ongoing problem within the industry that kind of comes from two specific sides. You've got one side who just think that games are super fun and think that games should be approachable and enjoyable for everyone. And the other side that basically won't stop until women have realised that it's not appropriate for them to criticise our hobby, or maybe even to make games or play them. And why don't they realise how beautiful I am? Now, obviously, I'm not going to try and address the latter group at all in this video. If you're one of those people, this just isn't for you. Because, I mean, your ideology is so loosely rooted in reality that I may as well start a kind of conference for dragons. And secondly, this whole thing is often described as a problem within the gaming community, but I'm not even willing to give them that. I mean, calling these people gamers. No. I mean, technically, people who go and chug themselves off in cinemas, they do watch a lot of films, but they're not really film buffs. Primarily, those people are total wankers. But anyway, I'm more interested in people who are sitting on the fence, and people who often sit on the fence with this stuff and don't wish to get involved with any of this stuff often ask me a simple question, and it's a reasonable question as well. Can't we just talk about games? And it's a reasonable question with a very, very simple answer. I am talking about games. Because games isn't about what's out this week, and games isn't about what came out last week, and games isn't even about what's coming out next year that you're excited about. Games is about what we were playing 10 years ago, right? And games is about what we're going to be playing in 10 years. And if looking that far ahead at the future seems pointless, you don't care about that, then well, ask yourself a simple question. What's your favourite game of all time? Work out what your favourite game of all time is, and then look up when it came out. Chances are, it was quite a long time ago. I'm going to suggest one simple reason for that. We were young. The world was full of things we didn't really know about yet, things to explore. Games were this exciting new thing, and they were fucking cool. But over time we grew up, and we grew up playing games, but we became more exposed to the same mechanics, the same ideas, the same themes, the same types of games, and after a while they started to lose their impact and started to become a little bit repetitive. And sometimes that's because that's what we wanted. You know, you can't deny the fact that familiarity has its appeal. It's like a warm blanket. We kind of want things that we've had before, and that's fine, and that'll never change. But even within my generation, we had a major shift that substantially changed the face of gaming. You know, the American market came to fruition, and games suddenly became much more realistic and macho, which at the time was quite exciting. It was a different change. But after a while, that did start to become dull, especially when the market became quite homogenous. But since then, the traditional mainstream gaming market, in terms of, console stuff and not all that guff on the phones, hasn't really changed a lot. And I think a big part of that problem is due to exclusion. So let's talk about games. Games are primarily marketed at a constantly shifting group of mainly young men. And, I'm a young man myself. Well, sort of. Anyway, there's this one group, they grow up, we get some new ones. There are hangers-on, there are people who are younger, there are people who are older, but primarily, if we're looking at this from a marketing perspective, that is what mainstream games are about. However, that's not entirely the reality. In the real world, games are actually much, much closer to being a 50-50 split of men and women, but they're always marketed. And because marketing is such a major part of production now, such a major part of the overall budget, it means the marketing in a way dictates the design of the game. And marketing's funny in the fact that you have to have a simplicity of message, which means often marketeers don't want to market games that aren't just for one small group, because the clarity of message and the way you focus on one specific group is what makes marketing work. But that's another bigger issue for another time. Back to the problem at hand, games are kind of getting stuck in a rut for two reasons. First of all, you have a small subset of people actually interested in making games, and then you also only have a small, relatively, in terms of the planet, small subset of people only interested in playing them. And obviously these two have a bit of a cyclical effect. And obviously there is a bit of a catch-22 here. You need to attract different sorts of people into the hobby in order to get different sorts of people into the creative process, but then you need different sorts of people in the creative process in order to maybe start getting different sorts of people interested in the hobby. But thankfully, we don't need to worry about that. We don't need to make any drastic changes to the way things work, because there are people who are interested in making games, even though games are quite categorically often not made for them. Obviously, there's a lot of fearful pitchfork chat about how games, oh no, ladies are going to get into games and they're going to make all of the games about lady things. No, I mean, that's just not the case. Women have been working in games for a long time. And the vast amount of women who work in games, which is not that vast, it's only about 15%, you know, most of them have to just put up with this bullshit. They put up with the bullshit knowing that, yeah, it's just, this is what blokes like, so I guess this is what games have to be. And they do that because they love games and they want to create games so much that they just sort of think, you know, it's one of those things. A lot of them are heavily involved with making games that are then aimed at completely different groups of people. They love the medium, and that's why they do it and why they put up with stuff that's perhaps a bit rubbish. But despite that, these women are still being constantly, systematically kind of hounded out of the industry. Not necessarily one at a time, but sometimes, you know, all it takes is one big case of somebody being substantially harassed or bullied to start making other women in the industry think, how long have I got before that's me? And that creates a culture of fear. This isn't good. Basically, the women who put up with this are super fucking soldiers, and we do not deserve them. But if we did lose them, then the games industry would be worse without them. Because let's get to the core of why you should care about this. It isn't about having a more feminine input into games. It isn't about making games that appeal more to women, even though both of those things wouldn't necessarily be bad things. It's about ensuring that games are not developed in a culture that is a vacuum. Because at the moment, that's kind of what we've got. The games industry is locked in a holding pattern, just going round and round and round. Teenage boys play action games, grow up, become developers, develop action games for teenage boys. Basically, until we can help develop this sort of cultural environment where people with great ideas can be introduced into the creative process based purely on the merit of their abilities and ideas, and not in terms of how well they fit into our kind of pre-existing notion of what a real gamer should look like. The games industry is going to be trapped in this cyclical bubble of tedious bollocks. Because a culture in which people are afraid to stand up and be different, a culture in which people are afraid to vocalize ideas that are different to what's already being done, is a culture that fundamentally, above everything else, thinks that safety is the most important thing. And that's a culture that creates products that are safe, reliable. It's what we've got now, and it's rubbish. So if you're fed up with an industry based on increasingly realistic guns and tedious pixel counting bullshit, then maybe we should talk about games. Because listen, when a woman receives so much sexual harassment that she can't be in the public eye, and she just needs to go behind the scenes and quietly make games with anyone knowing she's there, that's going to affect the way she works, and that's going to affect the games industry. So when I talk about that, I'm talking about games. When I talk about how a woman who makes videos critiquing some of the tone used in video games, and because of those videos, she then, with her family, has to leave her house because of the severity of death threats she receives. When I talk about that, I am talking about games. So if you don't care about all of this drama and you just want to hear about the next big I don't care about this drama, that's fine. That's fine, right? But the crucial thing is, you don't care about games. I don't know what you care about, but you don't care about games. But if you're going to sit around moaning about Call of Duty and sequels and EA releasing the same shit every single year, and then when faced with an actual genuine reason that contributes to the fact of why the mainstream games industry is stuck in a creative rut, if you're going to try and do both of those things and then willfully shrug this stuff off as being irrelevant, well, you can just shut the fuck up. And everybody else, well, it's time to stop standing for it. If you care about games, you should care about this. Because, you know what? I like talking about games. Can't we just talk about games? Yes. If you really, really just don't want to get involved in any of this stuff and you don't want to have to try and explain to a friend why what they're saying is a bit dim or wrong, if you just want to talk about games, you just want to talk about what game's out next week, game's out for Christmas, I don't want to deal, that's fine. That's fine, right? But you just got to bear in mind that in the future, if you do that, gamers might not be worth talking about. If they aren't, that's on you. Bye!